Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much. I hope it's 900 million barrels, though, rather than 900, but that would be a problem. Nice to see so many smiling faces here this morning. And I can see Richard and Thomas are here as well, so nice to see them again. You have to read that. You have to learn it, understand it, and be able to quote it by the end of the day, otherwise I'm in trouble with my compliance people. Xcite, so where are we today? We have a large reservoir that's very well understood, very well appraised, probably better appraised than most fields going into development. 250 million barrels of reserves, another 50 million barrels at the moment contingent resources, but we'll aim to turn those into further reserves by bringing them forward in time. A very long field life, 35 to 50 years production. We've drilled 3 wells ourselves on top of the previous 4 wells, $400 million spent, and we've addressed all the key development questions. We have put together a very innovative partnership to take the field into development. AMEC, Able, Arup, Baker, TK, and now Kossel, which is part of CNOOC, the largest Chinese oil company. And what we're doing is to de-risk the project cost and schedule by early engagement with these partners. A novel and, we think, quite innovative way of going about it. The progress to FDP has been the focus for this year in terms of technical and financial discussions. We're working hard on the technical piece still, and we'll update you as we go along. A lot of engineering being done prior to FDP, which again is unusual, and I'll come back to that. So a bit of geography. We sit here, for those who don't actually understand or haven't actually seen this before, so we're up in the northern North Sea here. We're just inside the border with Norway. Very high quality reservoir, very high porosity, very high permeability, which gives us the underlying mobility in the reservoir. So it's a very good body of sand. We have the underlying aquifer. You couldn't wish for a better reservoir structure and better geology. The oil, okay, it's heavy, we all know that, but the combination of viscosity and permeability gives you the mobility that you need, and we've proven that with a well test in 2012. The oil is benign, it's a nice heavy oil, no wax, no metals, very low sulfur. We've sold it in the market, as you're probably aware, 150,000 barrels in the well test through BP, a very good price achieved. So we know there's a market for it. In terms of context, the 5th largest in the field in the North Sea at the moment in terms of reserves. You've seen a couple of those projects being delayed, Rosebank and Bressay, but this is a very substantial, significant North Sea oil field. 300 million barrels recoverable in our view, at least, plus enhanced oil recovery. The plan and what have we done so far and where are we going? We have understood the reservoir. We've done more work than most people going into development. The normal well test scenario would be 7 to 10 days, have a headline flow rate and then go off to the banks. We haven't done that. We've done a 65, 70-day flow test to prove every aspect. We then move on to the development plan through project execution and onto FDP, which I'll come on to. So the reservoir, just briefly, 4 wells prior to Xcite. The first with Amoco, the next through with Conoco. They didn't have very good days. They didn't actually bring the fluid to surface in those tests. So we picked it up with an understanding of the reservoir, but not of the fluids and how they behave. The first well we drilled, the number 5 well, was to prove we could get it to surface, simple vertical well. The 6th well in 2010, proved that we could drill a competent horizontal section, 2,000 odd feet. Very, very important, this type of reservoir, to be able to prove you can do that. Very big success, very good flow rate. Armed with that, we went on to the 7-well, the well test, the extended well test in 2012. We drilled 2 horizontal sections. We flowed for 65, 70 days, as I've said, and we answered all the development questions. So this was a mini development scheme at that time. In terms of the progress made at each stage, the 5, 6 and 7 wells, 5, 6, 7 wells provided increase in resources and then in reserves. And obviously the big jump here from 2012, in 2012, from the well test going from 116 to 250 million barrels, largely because of the underlying recoverability of the field, so much better than we modelled. And on top of that, we have the contingent resources, and on top of that, the prospective. So the 2 billion asset value is only based on the 250 million barrels reserves. The well test I'll just cover briefly. This was a 65, 70-day flow test, as I've said, proving every aspect from drilling and completion technologies through to flow assurance, production chemistry, processing, blending on the tanker, and then off-take to market with BP. Very, very important to do that, we believed, to be able to demonstrate every aspect of development. So a mini development scheme, as I've said, we now understand exactly how the field will be developed. That then takes us into being able to design and construct exactly what we need, which is a different scenario from the normal where you are designing and constructing for uncertainties. So a very successful well test, quite a lot of experimentation, downhole, production chemistry, which actually gave us a lot of confidence in how it's going to behave in real production scenario. Simple setup, TK tanker, oops, wrong one. Yeah, TK tanker, subsea flow line, large production kit on the rig, some very serious production kit, again, more than you'd normally see for a well test, and a very successful period during 2012. What that's enabled us to do is actually simplify the development plan. So a simple thing being, for example, that prior to the well test, we'd assume we need an FPSO, expensive, quite difficult to get hold of. What we understood during the well test is that the natural dehydration of the crude happens just by sitting in the tanker for 10 or 12 days. So you don't need big offshore pots and pans. We didn't need an FPSO, so we can simply use an FSO, a tanker, just like we did in the well test. Saves costs, very good for long-term economics, keeps it simple. So the EWT proved what we needed to do, simplify the development plan, and, I say, enabled us to actually design and construct what we need, rather than trying to guess and assume. All these questions being answered, this is what I call the I told you so slide. We've had a lot of questions levelled at us over the years. It won't do this, it won't do that, you can't prove this, you can't prove that. Well, we have. This is the full gamut of questions that we needed to prove to go into development. And the well test answered them all. So what do we look like today? This is the current plan. Hasn't changed a lot, to be fair. We've changed the bits of kit for first phase, which I'll come on to. But a 2-phase development in the north and in the south. Most of the oil sits in the north, about 2/3 of the oil sits in the northern section. So phase 1. Relatively simple plan. We degas on the platform. We ship the oil and water over to the tanker. and let it naturally dehydrate prior to blending and prior to offtake. Relatively simple development plan. Phase 2 follows on about 5 years later. All of it gets joined up, so all the water and oil goes back through the first platform onto the tanker. And we also found that we could do subsea wells. Again, from the well test, the behaviour of the oil in the pipeline was very good. So we can use subsea wells if we need them. More about the first phase then. This is a Savan marine unit, a floating storage unit, tried and tested design, a lot of deck space on it, very stable dynamically, better for dehydration than a normal tanker. It actually bobs up and down less, so better for dehydration. This is the ACE, Arup ACE self-installing platform, rather like a jack-up rig. You float it out, you jack the leg down, suction base. About 48 hours later, you're ready to start drilling. So you don't have the big expensive costs of heavy lift vessels, of installation vessels, and equally in reverse, when you're decommissioning it, taking it away, if you pile a jacket into the seabed, that becomes scrap metal once you've done that, and it costs you a couple $100 million to get rid of it. This has none of those characteristics, relatively easy and cheap to install, and easy to decommission, which is good for us in terms of liabilities that DEC want to see at the outset. We've also decided to transfer the accommodation from the platform onto the Savan unit. It has a lot of deck space on there. Taking the accommodation off the platform lowers weight, therefore lowers cost. A very good example of how working together with our development partners early on creates natural synergies that you wouldn't normally find. So very good for everybody. The drilling rig comes along in the normal way and drills down through. 20 slot platforms in phase 1 and phase 2. That's actually the derrick of the drilling rig. It's not on the platform. But taking the accommodation off the platform allows us potentially to actually put a mobile unit on top later on. Again, good for longer term economics with well workovers. So a lot of important features which come into the choice of equipment here. Going on to project execution. Again, working with everybody in the same room, on the same agenda, not in isolation, creates a very good relationship. I think we believe we've managed to change the normal behaviour of contractors to being in, I suppose, what you might call natural conflict with the oil company, to being one where they work with us and they work with each other to bring the field into development in the most cost-effective and efficient way. And that's certainly what we're seeing with the contractors at the moment. We've chosen them deliberately because they have good relationships already and because we believe they're going to work well together. So that's where we sit today. Here's the partnership overall. Just coming back to the key issues here, which are to, prior to FDP, to further define costs and therefore mitigate cost overrun and also schedule delay risk, which are the two key issues that most people face in developments. Yeah, so we're trying to take the risk out of that by doing it slightly better, we think, slightly more effectively prior to FDP, which again is not the normal way to go about it. But a very important structure, very good team, we believe, and people who are incentivized to help us develop the field, to actually deliver it on time, in budget, and to produce as much oil as possible, as cheaply as possible, and obviously safely. So, next stage, FDP. The process, which is well documented in public domain, is that we're working on the technical piece of it now. There are two main elements, the technical piece and the financial piece. The financial piece will follow the technical piece by definition. Really, you can't actually put your funding together until you know exactly what you're going to build. So we're working on that at the moment. That's going well. The contract negotiations with partners is continuing. We have a good lineup now. We have now the complete lineup, we believe. The rig being the final piece with COSL. And so we're working hard to get that done as soon as we can. And once we have both technical and financial pieces in place, then we can submit a formal FDP to the government. Timing and scoping, you can see there. A lot of work's been going on this year. The timing really depends on FDP, no surprise there. Then no commits will be made, no underlying financial commitments until we have FDP. But from that period, 36 months is then our schedule to first oil, guided really by the new build equipment. So each of these will be new build. That actually gives us control over costs. It actually gives us control over delivery as well, which is very important, particularly with the rig. For those of you that understand the rig market, you can never be sure actually when you'll get a rig. With a new build, you can be relatively certain about that. Very important for us. So 36 months. That's actually got 30 on it now. Sorry, I've just seen that. So the COSL rig potentially could be ready end of 2017, which is earlier than that plan would suggest. But again, it's good to have certainty over that rather than uncertainty. So the major features again, the asset, the appraisal, the understanding, the simplified plan, the partnership in place for development, reduce the risks and costs and schedule, and had all that in place prior to FDP submission. A very quick run through. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yes. Hang on a sec. Could you wait for the mic and say who you are? Thank you. Just that other people can't hear the question.
Hello, Rupert.
Hi, Paul.
At the AGM, you said that on various websites, people had a focus on value being delivered with the first barrel of oil, and in your opinion, you felt that people should focus on the submission of a fully financed FDP. So given where the oil price is currently, which is obviously somewhat depressed, what would you say to potential investors looking to maybe invest in Xcite at this moment in time, 3 years away from production?
That's a surprising question.
Sorry about that.
Well, clearly I'm not going to give investment advice.
Sure.
I think what we're seeing in the market, my view only, is that it's a temporary oil price scenario. The politics are pretty clear to see. If you go back to fundamentals of what even the Saudis need for their social program, it's well above where we are today. The forward curve is still in the high 80s. I think people would generally accept this is something that's happening right now politically. It's probably short term. I don't feel it's necessarily a bad place for us to contract. I've long said the worst scenario is contracting at $110 oil costs and then finding yourself in $80 oil or $70 oil. Probably much better to contract in $70 oil and wait for the upside. So I'm not overly concerned about that at the moment. I think that the longer term scenario, we're 3 years plus to first oil. We have a 35-year field life. who knows what's going to happen? I certainly don't. But in terms of us and our strategy and where the partners sit today, the value is there in Bentley. There's no question about that. What we've found over the years, if you contract with your oil prices in sync with your costs, and that, as I say, is the trick, if it is a trick, but it's certainly the thing to try and achieve, then returns from Bentley are robust. And economically, it's a very robust field. So, of course, it's an issue we are thinking about and dealing with, but longer term, it's not something that I think will affect our plans.
Okay, and just one other quick question, if I may. Presumably there'll be a new reserves assessment report early in 2015?
I think the deadline for that is April, if I'm not wrong. I mean, it's something that we'll do for sure, but we're not chasing barrels. There's no point in chasing barrels today. I mean, we're doing the development planning. We're not doing...
I just want to ask about those 50 million barrels that we're looking to bring forward in time. Is that something that we maybe could anticipate for the next reserves, or is that further down the line?
Yeah, I mean, the focus at the moment is getting development plan done on the phase one area. To start, I mean, we need to do a lot more work to actually bring an optimization and everything else to actually bring those barrels forward in time. So it's not going to be a focus at the moment. That will come in due course.
Good. And further questions? Here we are.
Hi there, Rupert. Stuart Brown, private investor. How hopeful are you for the autumn statement for likely concessions in the North Sea?
Another surprising question. Thank you, Stuart. I think we've been disappointed so often that are we going to be optimistic? Probably not. The opportunity in there is with the oil price drop to give some very clear signals for investors, but I don't know.
Fine. Somebody over there? Yeah?
Hello. Michael Eleftheriou, private investor. You referred recently to material financial risk sharing with the engineers and the servicers. How much scope does it leave now for third-party financing, which could come from banks?
Well, I think as we've made clear in various press releases that the financial piece follows the technical piece and the commercial piece in terms of contracts. Our objective is to make it manageable for us. Now, I'm not going to give you a number because you'll throw it back to me if it were a dollar wrong. But the objective is to move the capital burden from Xcite to our development partners. Now, it isn't going to be 100%, that would be impossible, but the objective is to leave ourselves something that's manageable for us. But not with equity, let's just be clear.
Right, there's a question at the back there, right at the back now.
Mine too.
Hi, Rob Jantelpinski, private investor. Are you concerned at the lack of institutional investors in Xcite? It's been quite a bumpy ride over the last few years. Things started off pretty well. There's been quite a lot of promises and under-delivering. You've got a very high incidence of private investors. The share price being so low, does that not leave you at risk of being perhaps taken out at a very low price? And if someone were to bid for you, do you believe you've got a good defence programme in place? And that's pretty much my question.
I think that the lack of institutional investors is something we have to live with. I mean, we can't control the oil price, we can't control the market, we can't control the investors. The whole sector is in the same place. Some actually worse than ours if you look at the share price graphs. I think the plan we have in place is not relying on institutional investors. Otherwise, we would be in a much more serious scenario. I think the exposure we have, if you like, to what you suggest is, again, no different from many others in the marketplace. In terms of how we deal with that, if it arises, I guess the best defence you can have is to be able to explain and justify the valuation of your assets. Where we sit today is an absurdity. There's no question about it in terms of market cap. We're not alone. I guess we feel more perhaps hit than we should do given our assets. But again, if you look at the value of the assets, the certainty, the appraisal work we've done, I think we're in a decent place. If we hadn't got a decent development plan in place, we didn't have the partners, we hadn't done the well test, we were just sitting there with a big puddle of oil, it would be very different. But the best defence we've got is in our asset, our understanding of the asset, how we can demonstrate how we can develop it, which obviously is there, and also with third-party verification as well.
Right. Any further questions? Right.
Rupert, Peter Wilcox, private investor. Rupert, there's no clarity at all on your 2015 work programme in your presentation. Could you give us a little bit more indication of timing in terms of the FDP and how much more months worth of engineering you've got to complete before you can even look towards the FDP?
Well, as we've made it, I hope, clear in the announcement we made, we are working towards the FDP approval. The technical work, commercial work comes in front of the financial piece. I'm not going to comment on timing because it's not entirely within our control. We have a group of partners there to deal with. They have individual issues. We have to bring all those issues together with common commercial terms in the contracts, and that takes time. 2015 is about completing that work as soon as we possibly can. I think it would be unhelpful to try and say it's a certain date, because that would just bring a focus in that we actually have little control over. We are working as hard as we can, Peter, and we'll deliver it as soon as we can. Yeah, but the work programme is about creating the right environment for the technical and financial FDP pieces, so we can submit it to the government and get on with this.
Okay, well, I think we'll stop there. Thank you very much indeed, Rupert, for an interesting presentation.
Thank you.